actually not have anything on the agenda. So today is going to be a pretty open discussion-led meeting. So I will open the floor to folks that have questions or projects that they want to talk about.
Matt, what is the roadmap for OpenZFS releases? Do you have some perspectives what features should be available on next release or in this year? It will be interest to me because we try to port missing features to dealers, and I'm interested in some perspectives when you have plans trying to release something with OpenZFS releases.
Yeah. So Brian would be able to answer that better than I. He's not on right now that I see. So I'll do my best. The main projects that are in flight are, well, I mean, DRAID is the main one. So that's in master now, and the next release 2.1 will have that. So that's kind of the big exception to our guidelines about minor releases not having new features. And another thing that I know Brian was hoping to get into 2.1 was the force pool export. So being able to export a pool that's hung because of I/O failing, because the device is gone or something like that.
Yes, pool suspended, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So as far as I know, those are the two kind of notable things that we're hoping to have in 2.1. And I think that the timeline for that was this quarter. There's not, 2.0 kind of just came out. So I don't think that it's going to be like this month, but I think the plan was this quarter, so within the next 3 months. And then I think we should expect to see further minor releases like 2.2, 2.3 that would contain, again, almost all just bug fixes and probably no real exceptions, certainly no exceptions of the size of DRAID. And we would expect those, I think, on a roughly quarterly basis. And then we're hoping to get OpenZFS 3.0, the next major release, hopefully by the end of the year. That would be the fastest major release ever in the history of ZFS on Linux. So I wouldn't I wouldn't count on that, but that's the goal, is to get it out this calendar year. But realistically, I think that the cadence has been more like 18 months than 12 months. So I would say we hope to get it this year, but probably first half of 2022 is probably more realistic for 3.0.
Okay, thanks for your update. And what about RAIDZ expansion?
Sure. So actually, before, it looks like Brian just joined. So let's just ping him on that, ambush him on that to make sure that I accurately describe that. So Igor was asking about the release plans, and I mentioned 2.1 having DRAID and hopefully the suspended pool expansion for export, so force export. And that coming out in this quarter.
Yep, that's currently the plan.
Okay, and then roughly quarterly minor releases that would have mostly just bug fixes after that.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, maybe we can do them a little sooner, but I think quarterly is a good target to shoot for.
And then 3.0 aiming for the end of this year, but maybe realistically, first half of next year.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair too. So end of this year would be good, but since we're going to be putting out 2.1, which will have some big new features anyway, I think it'd be fine for it to slip a little bit. So that's what I'd expect.
What about the direct IO implementation? What's the status of that? I've kind of let that drop the last few weeks. So
yeah, so that's still in progress. We want to get that into the 2.1 release as well.
Yep.
Brian Atkinson was going to refresh it again. There was some feedback on that, and I think it's moving in the right direction. We got some feedback on the FreeBSD side as well, and it's still moving forward. So that's what I'm helping him work on for the next few weeks or months just to get it in. So yes, we'd like to get that into 2.1 and get it out in the first quarter.
Right.
There's also probably going to be a 2.0.1 point release fairly soon that adds support for like new Linux kernels and whatnot with backports from stuff in master. So that's getting put together just so it keeps working on the latest kernels.
Cool.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, anything else on those releases before I talk about the RAIDZ expansion? Okay. So you, Igor, you're also asked about RAIDZ expansion. I'm still working on that.
Yeah.
And I have continued to make progress. I gave a bit of an update on that last month's meeting, which I think you probably saw. But for other folks, if you want more details, I went into a lot of details last month. I didn't make my goal of getting a new PR beta release of that out by the end of last year, but I am still working on it. And actually putting time on it. So expect to see progress on that soon. I'm right now, specifically, I'm working on breaking out some of the ABD related changes to some of the ABD infrastructure. And I hope to have a PR out for that, like hopefully this week.
All depend on platform, right? ABD changes.
The ABD changes that I'm making work on both FreeBSD and Linux.
I'm interested in the Linux parts because it was based on Linux.
Oh yeah. I mean, I imagine you might have to make some changes there, but it should be very straightforward. Like the what I'm doing is making it so that the ABDT struct itself can be allocated by the caller, which is a little bit tricky on FreeBSD because the struct can be, the amount of memory allocated for the struct can be different sizes. On Linux, it's always a constant size. And I think on Illumos, I don't remember, but it's one of the two of those. So you can look at either the FreeBSD or the Linux code and copy that.
I probably will ask you try to help to me with it because you have experience with Linux and ZFS on Linux and probably try to point me to the better way how to port it because
yes.
I see something different and platform specific with ABD code.
Yeah, sure thing.
That's why I try to ask you.
Yeah. Are you, but in your, for DiLOS, it's based on the OpenZFS code, right? Not the Illumos ZFS code, is that right?
Let me explain. At this moment, ZFS code on DiLOS, more specifically to OpenZFS, but I did not port all features yet because I try to do it step by step, and with COVID, I was I missed something parts because I was infected, and try to merge some additional features like DRAIDZ, L2ARC persistent, and a little bit more. And I am interested in RAIDZ expansion because it can be interest to our business because Argo Technology is a company with a big storage features, and we would like try to import first features what will be interested to our business.
That makes
And
sense.
yes, and at this moment I try to move to use a more userland specific changes to be a more easy, try to be compatible with ZFS on Linux or FreeBSD, where we will see some additional changes to ZFS tests code, where you can find we can use the same userland parts on different platforms. It is our goal. Try to make a DLS platform to be more easy for ports of userland applications from Linux, FreeBSD, from Debian mainstream, something like that. And at this moment, ZFS code on DOS and Illumos are different because I have ported additional features what are missing on Illumos, and Illumos contain, for example, L2R persistent code what I did not port to DOS yet because I tried to specify some changes, and we have to be more stable in ZFS specific code for our business.
That makes sense.
And as a goal, I try to provide additional information to Brian. I want to use OpenZFS code DOS and try to prepare a special build environment where we can make changes only in ZFS code and use additional build board where we can try to test additional changes from OpenZFS to DOS platform.
That's cool.
It's a long, yes, it's a long-term project.
Yeah.
What I try to work. It is why I try to ask you about some features and some perspectives to be more informed about what the way I want to try to use for our specific to be more compatible with OpenZFS.
Yeah, so the long-term, like using the OpenZFS code base on Illumos, that sounds really cool. I know that Joshua Klulo was also interested in that. I don't know, like what, it sounded like it was getting more real in his mind last time I talked to him about it. So you might want to, coordinate with him if you're not already.
Illumos have an additional way. It's why I have my additional way with ZFS and something, because we have now found some agreements what way we can use for Lumos and for DOS.
All right. So on this specific stuff of like, wanting to get RAIDZ expansion. Yeah. So for RAIDZ expansion stuff, the ABD changes will be easy to port if you have the like abdos.c / abd.c breakup, and you have like your own Illumos abdos.c. Then I think the changes that I'm making will be straightforward.
Yes, I'm trying to work on some refactoring of code to be more compatible with OpenZFS way, where we can try to port our changes to OpenZFS 3, but to DOS specific, because DOS can be different with Illumos.
Yeah, gotcha. And then the other big thing that you would want to port in order to get RAIDZ expansion would be DRAID. Because a bunch of the kind of groundwork that was laid in DRAID is used by RAIDZ expansion. And I had to do that rebase, and it was a lot of work. Even though like
I understand. I need to try to port DRAID first and try to see the way about RAIDZ expansion a little bit later, because it will be based on DRAID.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm behind schedule, but at least you still have something that you can do to get yourself closer to where you want to be by porting the DRAID stuff over. and that'll probably keep you busy for a few days at least.
Thanks for your information. And
Yeah.
I hope additional platform can help try to find additional issues. And we have found additional issue with infinite loop in receiver stuff if checkpoint present. I will provide additional information, and because we try to minimize some steps with the small drives for reproduce this issue. For example, we are using for testing a storage about 1 petabyte. It is why I can try to find a more additional issues when we can try to find it on small drives based on the ZFS code. And some issues cannot be introducible with small data and can be reproducible only with the big data about 5,000 of terabytes or something else.
Well, all right.
I can try to help because we have, I can try to help with testing because we have our environment where we can try to test some specific. It is why I am interested in communication with OpenZFS, where we can try to provide some issues, try to understand it and fix it. And OpenZFS will be more stable. We are all interested in it.
Yeah, for sure. I think getting testing of, I mean, we're interested in any bugs that folks find in any versions of ZFS because there is a lot of common code and it probably exists on other platforms as well.
Yes, and additional issue, sorry for
go ahead.
Additional issue, it is, for example, if you are using a local drives connected to LSI, HBA, for example, you can see some specific delay where drive can respond. But if you try to use network device, for example, from SCSI or something else, you can see network delay where you will be wondering how it can impact of some ZFS works, and where we need some retry operation. If we have some drops of network connectivity and restore it again, we can try to restore a remote drive or something else. If this drive in RAIDZ or in some stripes of RAIDZ, and how it can impact of some works with threads. And also, Illumos have a faster threads instead of Linux, where we can see some code drops or some memory freeze before some additional thread can be finished. Also, additional issue with a network drive. If you have stripe of drives in RAIDZ, network drives, and one drive was offline, if you try to do import, you try to retry to this drive over network again and again if you try to do import, zpool import. And additional feature will be interesting to me. If we provide a specific Vdev, try to move it to offline state while we try to do import.
Right, so like doing the import, but telling it, hey, I know this drive is not there. Stop trying it and timing out a million times, and instead just, import it, but I know that this one is offline and don't bother trying it.
Yeah. If I know this drive is offline, I can provide this Vdev to import command and try to ignore it, where we try to open all Vdev all in one for update ZFS label.
Yeah.
I have provided this information.
There's been times where I would have found that handy as well. I ended up removing the /dev node to hide the disk temporarily so that the dying disk would allow the rest of the pool to import. with that disk offline. So a way to exclude that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Al. I think if we can specify vdev in import command, what we can offline it, temporarily offline or permanently offline, and online it later, where we can restore a link to remote device or to local device, it will very helpful tool with import command.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It ties in with some of the ideas of zpool properties of vdev properties that have been discussed. And we have some work that I think, Mark, maybe you're going to be working on to mark devices as ones that we don't want to allocate from. So this is, you could think of this maybe as sort of an extension of that, although, I mean, the way that we're, being able to do that import time is another special thing and whatnot. So it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of closely related.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting.
Mark, could you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I have implemented maybe exactly what Matt just said. A device class that doesn't isn't used for allocation.
Well, that's actually good. I'll reach out to you then and talk to you, because I haven't actually done any work in that space yet. So
okay.
That's on my horizon.
Yeah, I would very much like to get rid of that code in my private fork as soon as possible.
Yeah, great.
So you did it as a vdev type?
It's a bit hacky, but it's an allocation bias and an allocation class, and you mark the vdev as being in the exempt allocation class, and then it's still in an allocation class and all the invariants hold, but because it's an allocation class that is never used anywhere, it doesn't get allocated from. And I've added like assertions in the ZIO pipeline stuff and so on that we crash if we actually try to use it. The nice thing is that we don't do these assertions for the vdev label space, so like all the normal zpool management stuff still works. And that code is pretty much done. I just felt it was too hacky to upstream, but maybe that's
we should
enough.
definitely take a look at that.
Yeah.
That sounds very similar to like what we would. Sounds like you would do what we need to do. Like we need to just mark devices as ones that should not be allocated from. For a little bit of background information, the goal for us is that the customer may want to remove several devices with top-level device removal, and we want to mark all of them so that, like today, what you do is like you remove the first device, then you remove the second device, then you remove the third device. But when you're removing the first device, it's like copying data onto, the fourth and fifth devices where you want it, and also the second and third devices that we're just trying to remove anyways, which is one problem. And then another problem is like, I want to remove these three devices. Really, I would like to be able to check that there's enough, enough space in the pool up front, rather than like removing the first one and the second one and then getting to the third one and saying, can't do that because there's not enough space. So the idea is that when you start this operation, this kind of whole procedure, you would mark the second and third devices as don't allocate from them, and then you would remove the first device. And so that way, like when you're kind of there trying to do your whole thing, you get all the error checking, and then you also get better performance and stuff because we aren't trying to allocate on those devices. There's also some other kind of corner cases where you might want to use this to compensate for like badly performing devices or super fragmented devices or things like that.
Is there
so
any
using a MetaSlab
infrastructure?
allocation class to kind of move its MetaSlabs off to the side to where we're not going to do it sounds like a way to implement that. There's also additional logic that we need to do, like the space accounting and make sure that it will not run you out of space, kind of similar to what we do with device removal.
Is there any infrastructure in place right now so that we can change allocation classes on the fly? Because my impression was that it's done upfront, and I don't know what the variants are. The invariants are in that case.
There is not. If you take a look at the code for the dedicated metaslab for logging, I explicitly, so in the initial implementation of that, I did have it moving metaslabs between classes, and that is pretty tricky. So in the current implementation that's in the PR, we don't try to move them between classes. So that is a lot simpler. So yeah, I mean, maybe that's not the right way to go about it in terms of moving metaslabs between classes. I think that we, I'd have to check the design doc, but I don't think that we had envisioned doing that. I think that there's another mechanism for removing whole vdevs from the allocation rotor that that happens like when a vdev is offline. I don't think that code is very well exercised, but I think that it exists. Seraphim, do you remember any of that? You had like a little prototype of this, right?
I am sorry, I was trying to find a mute button. What was the question again?
For the vdev no-alloc stuff, do we do that by like changing the metaslab class or some other mechanism? Like, what was the mechanism that we did?
We are just taking the metaslab group out of the rotor. So yeah, it wouldn't be part of the normal class anymore.
Well, yeah, I think it would still. I think it's metaslabs would still be in the normal class.
Oh well, yeah, they would be in the class, but they wouldn't. Yeah, we wouldn't have any allocations from that.
But we would never visit that group.
Mhm.
Yeah, we just wouldn't. So it's kind of a different way of doing it from what Christian is talking about. But we should definitely like take a look at your code and see if there's any better ideas there.
Yeah, definitely.
Than what we have.
Not really convinced it's a better idea that I have, because this is the first time I heard that metaslabs still carry the attribution to an allocation class. My impression was that it's like something that is only relevant before the allocation is done, but apparently I misunderstood. So yeah, I don't know. I can share the code and somebody can take a look.
Okay, still worth looking at.
Yeah.
And I will try to upstream. I have working code for the vdev properties. Most of the properties it has right now are read-only, but there's a couple read-write ones, and no alloc was always, that was what I envisioned as the way to control it. You could just set the property on the vdev that, hey, don't allocate from this anymore. For your use case of the vdev removal stuff, but also like you're saying, if you have a really fragmented vdev and it's one of 40 vdevs, being able to say just leave that one alone would be useful. Yeah,
if you, I think that the way we designed it, like if you get that stuff, if you get that PR out before, then we can take advantage of that for the user interface. But if not, then we'll have like a new, subcommand or something, and then we can map that back onto the properties when they integrate.
Yeah, so I'll try to get that done ahead of time to save you guys a bit of effort on having to build an interface for it.
Cool.
But yeah, if not, don't let me hold you up.
We can see additional issue with performance on zpool import command when we have scrap or receiver is in progress if you try to import the pool after crash. And as a workaround right now, we are using external variable where we can stop a scan operation, import pool, and start scan operation again. It can, I think it can be implemented in ZFS code instead of try to hack it externally. It is an issue with scan operation on import. We have to stop it before import and start it again after import.
How long of a delay are you talking about here? Like a minute? Or?
I mean, for example, if you have active receiver or scrap operation on the pool and you have a crash, you try to import pool again.
Yep.
And if you have scan before receiver or scrap, it produce a big delay on import command.
Yeah, how big of a delay?
Because if you have 1 petabyte of pool, you have a very big delay where you just want to try to check vdevs what are using for 1 petabyte of pool.
Huh. That's
Something out
that's
there.
surprising that it's proportional to the size of the pool.
There's also already a
It's
delay.
all depends on delay, on network delay, because we are using network vdevs in pool, and with some network operation we can see some delay instead of try to use the local drives, for example.
Yeah, it's that's still that's not consistent with my understanding of the design of Scrub and Resilver, because that scan should only be able to run for a certain amount of time each TXG. Even with the sequential stuff, it's still all happening in sync context, I'm pretty sure. So like it should be proportional to the number of TXGs that go by before the pool is like, you know, fully available for use. But it should be like the TXG timeout 30 seconds or whatever times number of TXGs, and not proportional to any sort of performance. But it sounds like my understanding may be wrong. So something else there is going on that we should investigate.
Yeah, your understanding is wrong, because if you have a big pool about 1 petabyte and you have 8,000 of terabytes of data in compression and deduplication, you can wait without scan about 1 hour or more on the pool import.
Yeah,
if you have scan in progress, you can wait many more time, because it tried to start a scan before all vdevs finish to be checked.
Yeah,
so why does it take an hour to import even with no scan?
It's we are using scan of part of data for receiver or scrap operation, right? Partly scan before scrap. It's a part of fast receiver changes.
Yeah, it's looking for the block pointers. So sorry, are you, when you said it takes an hour to import, even with no scan, are you saying that if there is no scrub or resilver in progress, it takes an hour to import?
Yeah, if you have a pool crash, and while we try to import it again, we will restart of scan and next scrap or receiver operation.
Sorry,
if there are was in progress before crash.
Okay, but if they're not in progress, if there is no scrub, no scan, no resilver in progress, and you crash, how long does it take to import?
Okay, let me explain again. If we have a big pool where we try to run a scrap, for example, on the scrap, and if we crash a pool on something of issues by dead man or something similar, and try to import this pool again, scrap will be started again with the pool import command, right?
Right.
And before scrap, we will start a scan of data with the next scrap, right?
Right.
It is issue with big data where we need an import pool before starting of scan operation. And the pool import command can be finished if we have some network delay of some operations and try to import a pool where scan was in progress in scrap operation.
Yeah,
and at this moment, we try to hack it by external variable. We try to stop the scan, import the pool, and start scan after full import, where scrap will be working again.
Yep. Got it. Yeah, I understand the description of the problem. I was trying to get some
Oh.
more details about that, but we can take that
Sorry
offline.
for my English because I'm Russian. Sorry for my English.
Yeah, so why don't you file an issue and we can try to discuss on there to get more details about you know,
Yeah.
the numbers and try to understand why it would take hours to do that import.
Yeah. But you cannot reproduce this issue if you have a small of data. You can reproduce it if you have a big data and some network vdevs with some device for reproduce of this issue. I can try provide additional information or access to our test environment where you can try to play.
Yeah. I
some
mean, we could probably get you to measure, get some additional data during the import, like you know, using dtrace to see what's being read or things like that.
Ryan,
Okay.
does this sound familiar to that PR you updated a couple weeks ago, an older one of mine, about if you change the tunable for doing the checksum of everything during import, it doesn't actually stop it from visiting all the block pointers? Or the one I'm talking about?
You're talking
No.
about when there's no scrub in progress, but you have a crash and then it checks the past couple TXGs.
Yeah, and if you turn off the metadata verify or whatever, it still loops over every block pointer, but then doesn't check the checksum?
I mean, I don't think that's at play here. Well,
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, what I was trying to
Going
ask,
back.
what happens if you don't have a scrub in progress? Is it still slow? You know,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
the question I was trying to ask, but presume, like, I'm guessing that this only happens when you have a scrub in progress, and it doesn't happen if you are just doing that couple TXGs check. But I mean, another question, something that could be at play here is, like you said, looking at all of the data sets. So it would be interesting to know how many data sets are in, you know, Igor's system, file systems and snapshots and zvols.
Mhm.
We have seen similar issues like this where we put some minor mitigations in place. Like there's a delay before the scrub starts again during import. It delays like, I don't know, 10 or 20 transaction groups or something like that. Just keep it
Right.
out of the way initially before it starts. I think that might have been made tunable. You could try to increase it for testing, but nothing quite this severe.
Yeah, then I mean, yeah, it's hard to imagine like what is going to cause hours of delay there.
Very good to hear. I'm not only one with this issue, and I hope it can be fixed.
The other
all right.
thing to remember is in Solaris Illumos, the default timeouts for things like SCSI drives are based on a SCSI CD-ROM.
Yeah, they're really long.
Yeah, but I mean, this should be like minutes, right?
Well, it should be a lot less than minutes, but yeah.
Yeah, it should be unrelated. Well, it's related to the number of drives, but not the amount of data. So
Yeah. So
Wow.
invariably, we had to go in and adjust all that stuff.
It can be tunable if you have a network drive. For example, SCSI, you can use some specific I/O delay time.
Yeah, and the iSCSI stuff adds more complexity there.
Yeah.
Right,
And
cool.
I try to say we are trying to use a network devices where we can see some network delay, where the RA can respond a little later instead of local drives. And it produce additional delay on import operation if we have scrub in progress with the scan or something else. I think it's our specific of using of vdevs, but it can show where we can see some issues with import.
Yeah, it sounds like something is going on there that's causing it to do like an amount of work that is not, you know, bounded by those time limits, obviously. So we need to figure out what that work is
Yes.
that it's trying to do.
We have some retransmit operation based on TCP and based on SCSI commands. If it is why we can see additional delay on response of remote Vdev.
Yeah, but I mean, presumably your network devices are responding within, let's say, a minute, not hours, right? So
Hours, because you have a little bit more than one Vdev. You have a several Vdev in RAIDZ 2,
yeah,
where you should open all Vdevs all in one, try to update the ZFS label. Also, you try to check TXG, try to find a correct TXG
yeah.
for import
None of that stuff
operation.
is specific to scrubbing, though.
Yeah.
So that's the mystery. So let's why don't we discuss this in either an issue or a
Yes,
now,
we can discuss it.
yeah,
Try to
yeah.
discuss it offline with a little bit more details from my side. Thank you.
Thanks. I see a few other folks have raised their hands, so I want to make sure we get to them before we run out of time. Christian, did we cover what you wanted to talk about, or
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to lower
fine.
my hand. How do I do that actually? Okay. Yeah.
And then Mohammed, did you have a question? I see you raised your hand.
Yeah. Hey guys. I just I don't see Mav on here, Alexander, and me and him were exchanging some emails, and he thought it would be good to kind of bring it up to this forum and see if there are other people interested. So what he was trying to do was to use the ATA and SCSI priority scheduling as part of the spec to do some background work and offload some of that at the device level. So send commands with a specific priority so that they don't not all commands are created then equally in the system. And what I found out from, because he was having some issues with some drives and he was seeing inconsistent behavior, and so he wanted to get an explanation. So we dig a little bit deeper, and we found out from the firmware team here at Seagate is that it totally depends on the implementation of that product and the firmware being used. And most of the time what we do is that we work with the ecosystem. So I won't name names from the customer side, but the West Coast people that are huge in taking on our nearline drives, they basically request and test a certain firmware a certain way, the way they're using the drive and the priority bits in both SCSI and ATA. And then the firmware is released to them. So if we want to put it in a generic one, the firmware team was saying that they need to know a little bit more on how ZFS ecosystem would be using it so that it doesn't implement the generic case. And that's why it's not turned on if you just go buy a nearline drive from Amazon. And so Mav was like, hey, yeah, I'll be definitely interested in talking to you of what I'm trying to do and what I'm seeing in the drives that he had. And the question to this forum is that if it is an interest to the general body, I would much rather have one discussion where we set some agenda, and then I'll bring in the core firmware, architects, and they can debate it out, like why they can't just, turn on that feature for everyone. And if they do, what changes in the spec need to be ironed out? Because the spec is a bit ambiguous about how the drive or the priority will behave. And then if not, if it's not a spec related issue, if it's just a better understanding on both sides of how the drive is behaving for those priority bits and how ZFS is using it or wants to use it, then they can come to an understanding, and then that can be implemented. So if anybody is interested in being part of that discussion, you can send me an email, send me an IM or whatever. For Mav, I promised him after I come to this forum and open it up, if I can get some interest, then I can just have this one meeting rather than having multiple ones.
Yes, it can be interested because it can produce different results on different drives, where we can see some SCSI commands with a different timing, if I right understand of your points.
Yeah, so there's some priority scheduling features that are part of the SCSI and ATA spec, both in T10 and T13. But the thing is that they are not always worded the same way. So there's some of it is open to interpretation, but also it's not implemented in all the drives. So you have to kind of go figure out like, hey, do my drives actually support it? And if they do, then you actually send that command. But then it's even between us and WD and Toshiba and others, it's just not always you don't get the same behavior. So then the feature just becomes like, why would I even use it?
Yeah,
Like,
you'd have to know that you're using those drives, and like you said, your customers who are designing a whole hardware software stack and they're buying specific drives, they
Right.
set it up because they know that that's what's going to happen.
right.
But for a generic software solution like ZFS, it's hard without any special knowledge. It's hard for us to take advantage of that, because it's like, well, like, why would I set these special bits? Because I don't even know what's going to happen when it goes down to the drives, because I don't know what kind of drives they are. But in theory, I guess we could build in something that's like, we queried the drives. If the drives are running the right firmware that we know what it does, then we take some special behavior, to
Right. So I
pass
mean,
some
in an
hierarchies
ideal
down, right?
world, all you would need to do is actually look at the, the identify or the whatever bits and say, oh yeah, that feature is enabled. That means that drive, regardless
Works
of
the way I
what the
think.
vendor is, would actually behave the way the spec says it would behave from that perspective. But I think
Yeah.
there's some ambiguity in the spec, and then there's some other stuff that needs to happen. So I was offering a forum. I will invite like 3 or 4 firmware engineers who are deep into the, read channel level details. And then you guys can kind of say, hey, this is our use case, and what are, so
Yeah,
Nav was very interested, and I don't know if anybody else is.
it would be great to get like just a high level description of like what the drive can do based on that, and then we can think about like, what would like, let's just assume that we knew that we were always using these drives, or a significant portion of the time we're using these drives. How would we take advantage of that? And how much benefit would we get? And then try to figure out, because there's 2 problems. One is like, how do we know that we're in this situation? Is it worth knowing that we're in this situation? And then it's like, okay, if we are, then what are we actually going to do about it? How is ZFS going to take advantage of that information? So
yeah, and I see Mav is on, and he was trying to do it for background, so separating the background tasks
IOs,
from
yeah.
the tasks. So Mav, you want to talk about what you were trying to accomplish?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, I got late. I just connected. I missed the call event. So as I've written in my email, and as I've spoken on previous monthly meeting over 2 months ago, my goal was to separate different priority of requests. In particular, the biggest step was to separate background such as scrap, receiver, and other activities from interactive ones initiated by user, since the first has latency acceptable up to minutes potentially, or who knows, hours, forever, just to not cause common timeouts, while second still has to be in seconds and milliseconds. So obviously it could be, I think, interesting to have drive have that knowledge, so the drive could prioritize one over another, even if it's absolute priority. Since, okay, we know that we have work that has to be done right now, and while some other load can wait as soon as drive has free time for additional head 6. If it can't, if it does have time, sure, there should be some very minimal QoS to not cause timeouts, not cause some stuck tasks and other things. But as I understand, as I saw in my tests with WD drives, they kind of do that. They see if some request getting about 5-second latency, they still complete it. Like, there's no complete starvation, but there is some. And such level of things could potentially be beneficial. On more complicated level, it could also be interesting potentially to separate even synchronous requests from asynchronous, but it's slightly more tricky since asynchronous read may be potentially promoted to synchronous if we first issued prefetch request, but then has to escalate it to actual synchronous request when that even for which we prefetched has arrived, when actual application request has appeared, and that's maybe complicated. But for RAIDZ, we have really two kinds of writes. One is synchronous writes, another asynchronous writes. I don't know whether Drive can differentiate those two within its write cache. Is that generally possible? Because what I saw with WD is that as soon as request hits write cache, all requests become the same. It seems like that flag is dropped.
That's where the implementation details, and I don't think I think the spec is silent on that part, right? So that becomes
no, like so that my idea is that we have those kinds of information, and we could easily provide that information to Drive. I had some patches for FreeBSD for doing that. I've experimented it here and there, and unfortunately, I haven't found it really useful, usable in present environment.
One question is, we can compensate some of timing issues by HBA controller. We cannot use Drive, personal Drive directly. If we have RAIDZ, for example, we try to compensate of some timing in between different drives. We are not using one drive personally. What you
sure.
try to, for example, LSI controller can use additional cache on the HBA card and try to use this buffer between Drive and HBA and try to compensate of some synchron operation, try to move it on to HBA card and next move it to Drive, where we can use write back cache or not use it.
No, you are speaking about some additional use of differentiation between synchronous and asynchronous writes.
Yes. And try to compensate it by HBA cards. There are different. One card have additional cache, another cards have something else, and we can try to compensate of some delay or some latency based on HBA card.
Well, that could be interesting potentially, but that topic of cache on a card is more applicable to RAID cards, and we as a system heavily discourage people from using RAID cards together with ZFS. Since it's
we are using we have IT hardware, IT firmware for this card, but we still using CPU and cache and RAID card.
No, if there is a significant write cache and if it's battery backed, it's more significant investment. It's just practically different class of cards. None of our systems use that. But I agree that that information could be useful for a card, but barely buying additional card with additional memory would compensate things that could be done by the Drive directly. Since Drive is practically the only place in a system that knows about where it's head right now, how can it be scheduled, in what proper order requests should be executed. And to better handle that, Drive should have as deep queue as possible. But as soon as we submit more requests to the Drive, latency starts growing and we have no control over those latencies. And supplying priorities to the Drive is a way to say at which point latencies are acceptable and which they are not. Obviously, if we are doing scrap,
if you try to use a single drive, if you are using RAIDZ or several RAIDZ in stripes, you can use a different IOPS to personal drives where you can split it. For example, if you have a pool with one RAIDZ, you can see a one latency. If you can use a different RAIDZ in stripe in pool, you can see a different latency to operations, because first write operations will be moved to faster RAIDZ in pool.
Okay, right? If you are sure, ZFS already does different write balancing But when you are doing read, you have no choice. You have specific drive to read from, and the same
If
drive
we
at the
try
same.
to use a read, we are using arc or L2arc, where we can move data for reading if it is not one operation.
That's all very interesting, but I'm not getting what's your point. How is that related to IO priority, which I'm talking about?
We try to talking about a priority to personal drive. I tried to speak about it can be different in different configuration of pool.
Okay, but to each specific drive, we are sending some mix of commands. Some of those commands are high priority, some of those commands are low priority. But drive has no idea about that. Drive executes them all evenly, while obviously we don't need them to be even. No matter how we distribute load between drives, each drive will still get a mix of different load types.
Yeah, and you want it to execute, like, say, scrub IOs at a lower priority.
Yes, right now I've made a patch which recently was committed to delay non-interactive commands comparing to interactive and so on. But still, there are, from one side, there are still chances when those
there's still concurrent IOs.
There are still concurrent IOs from one side, and from another, I'm heavily trying to reduce that concurrency to keep latency in touch, but reducing queue depths, reduce performance of the drive, since the only drive knows how to schedule properly. So I'm trying to bring knowledge to the point where it's usable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Alexander. I think we're almost at the ending time of our meeting, so why don't we try to wrap up this discussion? And Mohammed, what forum are you going to use to gather folks together? Is that going to be on one of the mailing lists or on Slack?
Yeah, so that's what I was looking for your guidance on. Like, if I'm just trying to get an agenda together so that, you know, my folks know what they need to come prepared with, and for somebody from the ZFS side, you know, if it's just Mav just explaining the actual need and how ZFS would actually use what is currently out there, that's the kind of guidance I'm looking for. So if it's just like me mailing it to the mailing list saying, hey, this is the agenda, if you're interested, this is the call, that I can do that, no problem. If there's, you know, a smaller list that I don't need to blast it out, then that's fine too.
Yeah, I think that it might, if you have some information that you can send out before about, like, you know, the details of what's going on under the hood, and maybe that Alexander can add some ideas of what, you know, how you intend to use it with ZFS, then you might get more folks interested in attending the meeting if they can see some of the details and then connect that up with their.
I think, Matt, I'm trying to figure out like which way would be better, because I mean, I think if it's too big of a forum, then it's probably not going to go anywhere. So I'm trying to look for like, hey, there are people who are 4 or 5 that are interested in actually doing this, and then I'm going to only get the engineers from the firmware side.
Yeah, I think that you know, if you coordinate it on Slack, I mean, that's like probably the narrowest focus.
Okay.
Probably, you know, the folks who are on this call are mostly all going to be on the OpenZFS Slack. So you know, you could create a new channel or like post on there and try to like get some of this pre-meeting discussion happening, and then you know, and then maybe once you've kind of decided what to do, send out an email just to catch anyone else who might be interested. And I would do that to the developer at OpenZFS mailing list, since that's kind of the most focused on developers rather than like, you users. Know, the ZFS on Linux mailing lists have just tons and tons of users.
Got it. Perfect. I got what I needed. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Then let's, I think we're at our time limit, so let's wrap up the meeting. The next meeting will be February 2nd, and it'll be at the later time, 1 o'clock Pacific. Thanks, everyone. I see that with nothing on the agenda, we somehow managed to fill the hour with useful discussion. So I think that's a sign of a healthy community, and I enjoy everyone's ideas and discussion. And I hope that we're able to get to the bottom of some of the strange import performance stuff that Igor brought up. So let's please continue that offline. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye.